Okay, curious ones. Think about this for a second. 3 times in the last 100 years, governments faced a massive economic crisis and all made the exact same choice: print more money. It's temporary, they said. We'll control it. It's just to fix things for now. And 3 times, the result was identical: total currency collapse. First, Weimar Germany, 1923. People pushing wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy bread. $1 was worth trillions of marks. It was literally cheaper to burn money than to buy firewood. Then, Zimbabwe, 2008. They printed $100 trillion notes. Sounds funny until you realize that bill couldn't buy a single egg. Prices changed twice a day. Markets stopped making sense. And finally, Venezuela, 2018. Empty shelves, salaries that vanished before payday, and millions of people leaving the country just to find food. Every time, the same movie plays out. Crisis hits, the government temporarily prints to stabilize things, inflation jumps, confidence breaks, and the currency dies. What's fascinating is that every one of those governments believed their case was special. Our economy is different. We have safeguards. We know what we're doing. Spoiler, they didn't. Fast forward to today, the US Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, all have printed more money in the last few years than those 3 examples combined. Trillions created out of thin air. The same justifications, the same charts, the same economic theories. So here's the uncomfortable question. Are we watching the same pattern unfold again, only this time on a global scale? In this story, we're going to trace that pattern step by step, from Weimar to Zimbabwe to Venezuela, and see if the math, the behavior, and the consequences are repeating right now. Buckle up, curious ones, because when it comes to money, history never forgets.
Before we dive deeper into history, let's decode the pattern itself, the script that repeats almost word for word every time a currency collapses. Economists rarely agree on anything, but when you line up the data from Weimar, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela, the same 6 stages show up like clockwork. Stage 1, the crisis. It always begins with panic, war, recession, political chaos, or a massive debt bubble that bursts. Governments suddenly realize they can't raise enough taxes or borrow enough money to keep the system running. Stage 2, the printing. Someone says the forbidden line: we'll just print what we need for now. At first it works. Salaries are paid, markets calm, and people cheer. The problem is, printing money doesn't create new goods or services. It just stretches the same pie thinner. Stage 3, the excuse. Leaders reassure everyone it's temporary, we have it under control. They blame speculators, foreign enemies, or greedy corporations. Meanwhile, the money supply quietly doubles, then triples. Stage 4, acceleration. Prices begin to rise faster than paychecks. Businesses raise prices to survive. Workers demand higher wages, and the spiral feeds itself. The public loses faith in numbers, because by the time you print the price tag, it's already wrong. Stage 5, control. Desperate, governments impose price freezes, currency pegs, or capital controls. The result? Empty shelves, black markets, and even more chaos. Once confidence is gone, control becomes impossible. Stage 6, collapse. People stop trusting the national currency. They rush to gold, dollars, or anything that still holds value. Hyperinflation explodes, millions, billions, trillions, until the money itself becomes worthless paper. A reset follows, a new currency, a new promise, a new start. The scary part is how predictable it all is. The data looks different each century, but the curve is the same. A quiet rise, a steep bend, then a vertical explosion, the point of no return. And right now, if you plot global money supply after 2020, you can already see that bend starting. So curious ones, here's the question. Are we at stage 2 or already sliding into stage 4? Let's test that by looking at the first real case, the Weimar Republic, 1923, where this entire pattern played out almost like a textbook.
Curious ones picture Berlin after World War I, a country buried in debt, industry limping, politics on a knife's edge. Prices are rising, tax revenue is falling, and the government is cornered. Then comes 1923. France and Belgium occupy the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heart, to force reparations. Berlin calls for passive resistance. Factories slow, workers strike, and the state promises to keep paying them. Where does the money come from? From the printing press. The Reichsbank discounts more and more government paper, and the money stock explodes. At first, it feels like a clever patch. Wages get paid, bills get covered, everyone breathes for a month. But printing money doesn't create coal or steel. It just creates more claims on the same scarce goods. The math starts to break. Prices tick up, then sprint. Merchants can't keep up with labels. Cafes rewrite menus twice a day. Paymasters deliver salaries twice daily because a morning wage buys more than an evening wage. People rush from factory gates straight to markets before prices jump again. Velocity, the speed money changes hands, goes vertical. The exchange rate collapses like a trapdoor. Before the war, $1 bought about 4.2 marks. By November 1923, it's roughly 4.2 trillion marks per dollar. That's not a typo, 12 zeros. Monthly inflation peaks around tens of thousands of percent. Prices double in a matter of days. Wheelbarrows of cash aren't a metaphor anymore. They're logistics. Notice how the six-stage pattern clicks into place. Crisis, war debts, reparations, and the Ruhr shock. Printing, temporary monetization to fund resistance and deficits. Excuse, leaders insist it's manageable. The real enemy is speculators. Acceleration, wages chase prices. Prices outrun wages. Confidence cracks. Control, talk of price caps and rationing. Shelves thin and black markets bloom. Collapse, the mark becomes accounting noise. People flee to dollars, gold, goods. Daily life turns surreal. A loaf of bread that cost a few hundred marks in early 1923 costs billions by autumn. Rent contracts implode. Savings, decades of discipline evaporate in a few weeks. Barter returns because paper can't hold value long enough to cross the street. How does it end? With a reset. In November 1923, Germany introduces the Rentenmark, a parallel currency backed by mortgages on land and industrial assets, and, crucially, a hard cap on issuance. Fiscal policy tightens, the printing slows, and confidence creeps back. By 1924, the Dawes Plan restructures reparations and external credit stabilizes the system. The hyperinflation burns out, but not without scarring a generation. The lesson isn't philosophical, it's mechanical. If you finance real economic holes with paper, you don't fill the hole. You dilute everyone's claim on what's left. Once people expect tomorrow's prices to be higher, the fire feeds itself. They spend faster, velocity rises,
and even more printing can't catch the blaze it started. Keep that curve in mind, curious ones. Next, we'll jump decades forward to Zimbabwe, 2008. Different continent, different politics, same math.
Curious ones, fast forward to Southern Africa. The 1990s end with stress, but the real break comes in the early 2000s. Collapse in output, land seizures that crater agricultural productivity, shrinking exports, and rising deficits. The state still has bills to pay, salaries, subsidies, programs, while tax revenue sinks. The gap gets bridged the easy way. The central bank expands the money supply. At first, it feels like relief. Cash is available, government arrears clear, markets loosen up. But money printing can't conjure maize, fuel, or foreign currency. You get more claims chasing fewer goods. Prices begin to drift, then surge. Businesses update price boards daily, later twice a day. Workers sprint from payroll windows straight to markets because an hour changes the price of cooking oil. Denominations leap, thousands, millions, billions, trillions. Then redenomination, then the same climb again. You've seen the photo, the $100 trillion note. It's not a quirky collectible. It's a measure of how fast the currency can disintegrate when confidence is gone. Shops post USD-only signs. Fuel stations demand hard currency. Informal markets dollarize themselves long before the policy does. Line it up with the 6 stages. Crisis, output collapse, fiscal holes, external shortages. Printing, monetization of deficits and quasi-fiscal operations. Excuse, temporary liquidity, blame on speculators and foreign forces. Acceleration, wages chase prices, supply chains unravel, velocity spikes. Control, price freezes and FX pegs. Empty shelves, black markets. Collapse, hyperinflation goes vertical, people flee to dollars and rand. Daily life, ATM lines with withdrawal caps that buy less each hour. Salaries paid in stacks that won't cover a bus fare by evening. Receipts printed in scientific notation. Barter returns. Cooking oil for bus tickets, fuel for medicine. Accounting becomes survival. Inventory turns into a hedge. The end game is a reset. In 2009, the government effectively abandons the Zimbabwe dollar and legalizes multiple foreign currencies, USD, Rand, and others for transactions and taxes. Prices stabilize not because the economy magically healed, but because issuance of the failed unit stops and confidence migrates to units with credible limits. Later experiments, bond notes, new RTGS, WZL units show the same rule. Without fiscal discipline and a hard constraint on issuance, trust drains fast. The lesson mirrors Weimar with a different accent. Paper can bridge time, not reality. If production falls and deficits are filled with printing, you're not solving shortages. You're reallocating loss through the price level. Once people expect tomorrow to be pricier, speed replaces savings, and the currency's clock runs out. Hold that thought, curious ones. Next up, Venezuela, 2018. Oil wealth, strict price controls, exchange pegs, and another textbook run through the same math.
Curious ones, let's move to Latin America, a country once so rich in oil it was called Saudi Venezuela. For decades, it lived off its petroleum exports, using that cash to import nearly everything else. Then, the cycle broke, oil prices collapsed, debt piled up, and political turmoil deepened. Suddenly, the government was spending more than it earned, but still promising subsidies, social programs, and fixed exchange rates. The solution, once again, came from the same machine, the printing press. The central bank began quietly creating bolivars to cover the gap, salaries, public projects, and even farming debt interest. At first, it seemed invisible, but in an import-dependent economy, new bolivars couldn't summon new goods. Dollars were scarce, production collapsed, and the country started drowning in its own currency.
Prices began to move in waves, first monthly, then weekly, then daily. Shops stopped labeling items because tags became useless. A kilo of rice doubled in price between sunrise and sunset. Salaries turned to dust before payday. People ran from ATMs to markets, buying anything that still had value. The word inflation stopped meaning anything. It was just chaos. The government reacted exactly as the pattern predicts. Crisis, oil crash, and fiscal imbalance. Printing, monetized deficits through the central bank. Excuse, economic war, foreign conspiracies, temporary adjustment. Acceleration, wages versus prices in a losing race. Control, strict price caps, fixed exchange rate, import licenses. Collapse, Boulevard loses credibility, citizens dollarize informally. By 2018, the inflation rate was astronomical, over 1,000,000%. Think about that. A cup of coffee that cost $1 in January cost over 10,000 by December. The IMF literally ran out of digits. People paid with bags of cash or bartered with food and soap. Stores closed because they couldn't restock. Banks limited withdrawals to a few cents worth per day. To survive, Venezuelans found new currencies, US dollars, Colombian pesos, even cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and USDT started circulating. Informal markets priced everything in USD long before the government admitted. Hyperinflation didn't just destroy savings, it rewired daily life. The government later tried redenominations, Boulevard Fuerte, Boulevard Soberano, and eventually the Boulevard Digital. Each one lopped off zeros, but not the underlying cause. Without fiscal restraint, the zeros always returned. By 2021, the country had removed 14 zeros in total, the same number it had printed into existence years before. The tragedy is how ordinary people adapted. Teachers, engineers, doctors, all turning into street vendors or emigrating. Families saving in cans of tuna or car parts, anything that held value. A generation learned economics the hard way. That money isn't wealth, it's trust. And once that trust dies, so does the currency. The pattern was complete. 3 countries, 3 continents, 3 decades apart, all following the same mathematical slope, from temporary measure to total collapse. And yet, here we are again, in a world where the printing presses hum louder than ever. So, curious ones, in the next chapter, we'll step out of history and into the present, post-2020, where the same forces are building on a global scale.
Curious ones, now we leave the history books and step into our own timeline. The year is 2020. The world shuts down, economies freeze, and governments everywhere face the same impossible question. How do you keep the system alive when everything stops moving? The answer, again, was printing, but this time not with ink and paper, with keystrokes. Trillions created in digital form, injected into markets, banks, and stimulus checks. The scale was unprecedented. The US Federal Reserve alone expanded its balance sheet by more than $5 trillion in a single year. The European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of England all joined in. It worked temporarily. Markets bounced, jobs returned, spending surged. People said, see, it's different this time. But inflation is a slow predator. It first hides, then it appears everywhere. By 2022, consumer prices started climbing in unison across continents. Groceries, rent, energy, all more expensive. The official narrative said supply chains, war, temporary shocks. Yet underneath, the same math from Weimar, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela was whispering. Too much money chasing too few goods. Central banks reacted with a familiar contradiction, raising interest rates to fight inflation while still sitting on massive piles of debt. It's like pressing the brake and the accelerator at the same time. Governments addicted to cheap money kept spending.
And as real rates turned negative, savers began to bleed quietly, their purchasing power melting month after month. If you plot global M2 money supply from 2000 to 2025, you see the same curve every hyperinflation starts with. A gentle slope, then a sharp bend upward after 2020. We're still on the left side of the curve, but the shape is already familiar. The justification hasn't changed either. It's temporary. We can unwind it later. We have better tools now. Maybe that's true. Maybe the technology and global coordination really will keep the system stable. But remember, every nation that collapsed under inflation said the same thing. The words are always identical, only the scale changes. Today's difference is magnitude. Instead of one country printing too much, the entire planet is expanding simultaneously. A synchronized monetary experiment with no historical precedent. If the pattern holds, the danger won't appear overnight. It will creep in through trust. People start questioning the value of their savings, then the logic of negative yields, then the credibility of promises. Once confidence erodes, the math takes over, and reversals become politically impossible. The global system still functions, but the warning lights are flashing. The lessons of Weimar, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela are no longer just history. They're the mirror image of our present balance sheets. So, curious ones, in the next chapter, we'll ask the question that every government loves to repeat. Why this time is different? Because maybe it is, or maybe it never is.
Curious ones, every generation facing a debt and inflation problem says the same four words. This time is different. Is the most comforting sentence in economics and also the most dangerous. In the 1920s, German politicians said, "We're rebuilding after a war. This inflation is patriotic." In the 2000s, Zimbabwe said, "Ours is not real inflation, it's sabotage from abroad." In 2010, Venezuela insisted, "It's an economic war, not a monetary issue." And today, global leaders repeat, "It's transitory, we can control it." The logic is seductive. After all, modern economies look nothing like Weimar or Zimbabwe's. We have digital banking, advanced production, algorithmic trading, and the world's most powerful central banks with entire armies of PhDs watching every decimal. Surely we are smarter. Surely we can print and manage it. But here's the thing. Mathematics doesn't care about politics, technology, or confidence. If the amount of money in circulation grows faster than the amount of real goods and services, the ratio, the value of money, falls, always. The variables have changed, but the equation hasn't. You can delay the pain by tightening later, by tweaking interest rates, by swapping debt between institutions, but you can't erase the imbalance. The gap just moves somewhere else, into asset bubbles, housing, stocks, or government bonds that only make sense as long as rates stay near zero. And that's where the trap lies. Every modern system eventually reaches a point where raising rates threatens to collapse the debt structure, while keeping them low feeds more inflation. It's the same fork in the road Weimar faced, only now it's global, and the numbers have more zeros. The smartest economists alive know this. They just don't agree on the timeline. Some think technology will outpace the inflation curve. Others think demographics and debt saturation will keep prices tame. And some whisper that the only real way out is through, meaning inflate the debt away slowly, decade by decade. The truth? No one knows. But history shows that every society that believed this time is different eventually discovered that it wasn't. Confidence is a fragile asset. It builds slowly, then vanishes in a single headline. When people start doubting the unit they measure everything in, salaries, savings, value itself, the system doesn't bend, it snaps. So when you hear "don't worry, it's under control," remember, that phrase has been spoken in every hyperinflation ever recorded. In the next chapter, curious ones, we'll trace the early warning signs, the indicators that always appear before a currency loses its footing. Because the fire doesn't start with panic, it starts quietly, with numbers no one bothers to question.
Curious ones? Before every collapse, the signs are there, hidden in sight. The number starts whispering long before anyone screams crisis. The first warning comes from debt. When a nation's debt grows faster than its GDP for too many years in a row, it's no longer financing growth. It's borrowing from the future to survive the present. In Weimar, it was war reparations. In Zimbabwe, collapsing exports. In Venezuela, oil dependence. Today, it's structural deficits. Governments spending more every year, even during economic booms. The second signal is negative real interest rates. That's when inflation quietly eats more than what your savings earn. It feels invisible, but it's brutal. If prices rise at 6% and your bank pays 2%, you lose 4% of your purchasing power every year, even while the number in your account looks the same. It's a stealth tax, and it never ends well. Then there's the fiscal illusion, when citizens believe services are free because the government pays for them. In reality, it's paid through new debt and printed money. At first, it feels painless. Later, prices reveal the truth. Another coup hides in price controls. The moment a state tells businesses what they can or cannot charge, the market stops signaling scarcity. You see it first in energy or food. Prices freeze, supply dries up, shelves go empty. History repeats. Every price cap breeds shortages and black markets. And finally, trust metrics. The hardest to quantify, the most lethal to lose. Watch for capital controls, withdrawal limits, new regulations that restrict movement of money. Those are not random. They're the financial equivalent of border checkpoints. When governments start fencing in their citizens' savings, it's because they know confidence is cracking. These signs don't appear all at once. They creep in slowly, normalized by headlines and policy jargon. Temporary measures, market adjustments, quantitative easing, it all sounds technical, but underneath is the same dynamic. The system is trying to stretch confidence farther than reality allows. And here's the catch. Hyperinflation isn't just about money supply. It's about belief. The moment people collectively stop trusting tomorrow's price, the velocity of money explodes. Everyone spends faster. Saving becomes irrational, and the spiral begins. Every empire, every currency, every central bank that collapsed ignored these same early signals. They mistook calm for stability, silence for control. So when you see these signs, record debt, negative real yields, price caps, and quiet capital restrictions, don't think panic, think physics. Because this isn't ideology, it's arithmetic. And in the next chapter, curious ones, we'll talk about what can still be done. Not to predict the collapse, but to prepare wisely if the math refuses to bend.
Curious ones, let's be clear. This ain't about fear. It's about strategy. Every time a monetary system starts to strain, people split into two groups, those who panic and those who prepare. Panic burns energy. Preparation builds options. The truth is, you can't stop inflation as an individual. You can't rewrite fiscal policy or fix global debt, but you can choose how much exposure you have to the system that's losing balance. Step 1, diversify intelligently. Don't think get rich, think stay solvent. Spread risk across assets that move differently, some cash for liquidity, some productive assets that create value, maybe exposure to scarce resources or real infrastructure. Step 2, reduce fragile debt. Leverage is a time bomb when currencies shake. What was cheap credit at 2% becomes unpayable when rates hit 7%. The less debt you carry, the more freedom you have when things tighten. Step 3, learn to think in real terms. Forget nominal gains, focus on purchasing power. Earning 10% while inflation runs 12% means you're losing, just slower. Protecting the value of what you own matters more than watching the number rise. And step 4, store optionality. Knowledge, skills, community, they don't inflate. The ability to generate value regardless of currency conditions is the ultimate hedge. When everything reprices, people who can solve real problems never go broke. And finally, stay liquid enough to move. In every hyperinflation, those who kept a fraction of their assets in stable units, foreign currency, commodities, even barter goods, navigated the storm better. Liquidity isn't greed, it's defense. These aren't investment tips, they're survival principles. The goal isn't to beat the market, it's to outlast the distortion. History shows that every reset rewards patience and punishes denial. The people who looked at uncomfortable data early didn't need to be geniuses. They just needed to listen to the math before it started screaming. And there's a deeper layer to this, curious ones. Hyperinflation isn't only an economic event, it's a social stress test. It reveals how much trust a society really has in itself. Communities with strong local bonds, skill networks, and shared resilience bounce back faster than those built only on speculation and screens. So don't wait for headlines, prepare quietly, rationally, and without drama, because protecting value in money, in knowledge, in relationships is the same process no matter the century. In the next and final chapter, we'll close the loop, connecting all three collapses, today's data, and the one constant the world keeps ignoring, that history doesn't repeat exactly, but it always rhymes, especially when it's paid in paper.
Curious ones, look at the whole arc now. Weimar, 1923. Zimbabwe, 2008. Venezuela, 2018. Different continents, different politics, same mechanics. A shock hits. Deficits widen. Printing just for now. Prices outrun wages. Controls appear. Confidence breaks. Reset. Since 2020, we've run a global version of the opening chapters. Balance sheets ballooned, real rates turned negative, and the story was wrapped in new language. QE, facilities, transitory. Technology changed, human incentives didn't. The uncomfortable truth is simple. Money is a social contract priced in trust. When issuance outruns production for long enough, the contract frays, quietly at first, then all at once. That's not ideology. It's arithmetic plus behavior. Nothing here predicts a doomsday date. This isn't prophecy, it's a pattern detector. If policy tightens, deficits shrink, and issuance obeys hard constraints, the curve flattens. If not, the curve bends the way it always has. So what do we take with us? Respect the math. Nominal numbers can lie, purchasing power doesn't. Watch the tells. Debt versus GDP, real rates, price caps, capital fences. Choose resilience.
Diversify, reduce fragile leverage, stay liquid enough to move, invest in skills and networks that don't inflate. History doesn't repeat line by line, but it rhymes with perfect rhythm when incentives rhyme too. If the last century taught anything, it's that confidence is the real currency. Guard it, personally and nationally, and the system bends. Lose it, and the system snaps. If you want us to map these signals country by country with current debt paths, real rate snapshots, and policy risk scores, drop pattern in the comments. Until then, stay curious, stay prepared, and remember, money is a promise. Make sure yours is one that reality can keep.